everybody, how's it going? Let's talk about your home recording studio. This is going to be episode 2 of the Home Recording Basics series, and in this episode, we're going to focus on microphones. There's a lot to cover, but I'll try to keep it simple here. Basically, I just want to be able to arm you with the information that you're going to need to be able to make an informed decision buying your first microphone. There is an immense amount of choice, an immense number of options. It can be a little overwhelming. You look through the catalogs, you look online, and there are just hundreds of different microphones out there. We can simplify this a little bit. We can basically break it down into 3 major types of microphones that are really going to be of interest to somebody recording at home. There are dynamic microphones, there are condenser or capacitor microphones, and there are ribbon microphones. All right, so let's first talk about dynamic microphones. Dynamic microphones have a couple of benefits, a couple of drawbacks. So I would say that one of their main benefits is that they tend to be rugged. They tend to withstand abuse pretty well. And also they tend to be able to take immense amounts of volume, of sound pressure, so you can get them really close to really loud things, and they can handle that pretty darn well. The drawback would be that they're not quite as detailed. They're not quite as sensitive as other types of microphones. That may or may not be a big deal depending on what you're doing with it. As an example of a dynamic microphone, and this is probably one of the world's most popular microphones. This is a Shure SM57. This is just a classic because not only is it extremely durable, it's rugged, but it is pretty good at a lot of things. I'm sure that no matter what you decide to do with an SM57, there are probably other microphones that could sound better, probably, but it sounds very good, and it is almost indestructible. I think short of disassembling it and chopping wires out of the inside of it, I think you would have a hard time really doing any lasting damage to an SM57. You could probably drive over it with a truck. This honestly, this was my first microphone. I've had this one for over 15 years, and it looks like it's just new out of the box. Of course, it doesn't really leave my house, but it has lasted. I use this to mic guitar amplifiers, some really loud amplifiers, and it does a stellar job of that. I think just one of these right up on the grill just does a fantastic job of capturing an electric guitar amplifier. Another really popular application for them is to put it on a snare drum, on a acoustic drum kit. That's one of the most popular choices for that as well. I think it makes a great first microphone just because it is pretty good at so many things. You can sing into it, you can mic an acoustic guitar with it, mic electric guitar with it, mic drums with it, brass and woodwind instruments. It does, a pretty darn good job of all that stuff. I would put it up for serious consideration if you're looking for your very first microphone. Okay, so the next type of microphone that we're going to talk about is a condenser microphone, or some people call it a capacitor microphone. These microphones, by nature, generally require a voltage to be sent to them from the preamp. This voltage is called phantom power, and there's usually a button on your interface or preamp that you press it to engage. It'll say 48V, which means 48 volts. That's a pretty standard voltage that most condenser microphones need in order to operate. So if you've bought a condenser microphone, you plug it in, and you can't get any sound out of it, that could be why. It may not be broken, you just may need to deliver it 48 volts of phantom power from your preamp. So there are a couple of kind of main varieties of condenser microphones, as you've probably noticed. The first variety that we will talk about is a small diaphragm condenser. This is a Shure SM11. Honestly, it's probably a little pricey of a microphone for like a first microphone for a entry level home studio. It's a very good microphone. I really like it. Actually, I'm using one as a boom microphone right over my head, so that's what you're hearing the audio here from. But there are all sorts of more budget-minded options. The first ones that I got, let me reach over here. The very first ones that I got were from MXL. MXL is a brand that you've probably run into if you're looking for kind of more budget-minded, kind of entry-level microphones. They are manufactured in China. This is a here. Get the silica gel out of the way, but you can see they're just in a little foam padded case. This is a stereo pair of them. Although since I don't, the stereo pairs of the pencil condensers or small diaphragm condensers are handy if you need them for overheads for a drum kit, for an acoustic drum kit, or if you're miking like an ensemble and you would like a stereo image of a choir or chorale, an ensemble of some sort. Very handy for that, maybe a jazz ensemble and you don't want to put microphones on each and everything. In a home studio, getting a stereo pair of microphones, probably not all that necessary. Most of the time it's just one person, maybe one or two people. And you're probably not quite as interested in capturing the sound at a distance in a stereo miking kind of configuration. But the brand MXL is one to keep in mind. They're budget-minded. They're kind of like the bang for the buck is pretty good on them. I think that this pair, I think they still sell these. These are the 993. I believe that they still sell them. I got them on sale, I think maybe $150 for the pair of them. I'm not sure what they sell for right now. I haven't priced them for a while. But they tend to excel because of the small diaphragm, and that is the diaphragm refers to the element that is inside of the microphone that reacts to sound, that reacts to sound pressure. And my camera is not being very cooperative with focusing today, so you can kind of see the entire diameter of the microphone's pretty tiny because it really doesn't need much. I don't need extra space in there. So the element, the actual diaphragm in here, is pretty small. So I call it a small diaphragm condenser. That diaphragm small size makes it able to very quickly react to very sharp, very dynamic sounds. We call those sounds transients. And small diaphragm condensers are noted for their transient response, which means that they are able to really quickly react to, say, like the crack of a snare drum, or maybe if you're playing acoustic guitar, that kind of percussive sound of the pick hitting the strings, or at least not necessarily the actual pick hitting the strings, but that just very quick attack that it has. They're very good at preserving that. So these tend to be also favored for recording acoustic guitar and acoustic instruments. Very handy to have around. But they don't tend to do all that great on vocals. They don't suck for vocals, but they tend not to be the first choice. What does tend to be the first choice for vocals is another type of condenser known as a large diaphragm condenser. And these probably look familiar if you've shopped around. And so this, as you can see, it's a much larger microphone compared to a small diaphragm condenser. The main benefit of a large diaphragm condenser is the larger diaphragm that's in here tends to capture an immense amount of detail. They're very sensitive. So they tend to be preferred for capturing the human voice, or really anything that you just want a very intimate representation of what's happening in front of it. So some people really like these for acoustic guitar, and they are very good at picking up acoustic guitar as well, especially if acoustic guitar is going to be featured in your song or in your mix. The third major type of microphone are ribbon microphones. I don't own any. I have kind of limited experience with them, so I'm not going to really go on too long about them because I don't have much to offer you there. But their kind of defining characteristic tends to be that they have a very smooth, high frequency response. So a lot of people tend to like to use them on things like guitar cabinets to kind of smooth out that high frequency, the high end of it. Some people like them as drum overheads or on specific parts of a drum kit, especially in combination with other microphones. And people like them on brass and woodwinds, saxophone, things like that. So with those three different types of microphones, and they all kind of have their own benefits and drawbacks and everything. So if you're looking to choose one for your very first microphone, there are a couple of considerations to make. What are you going to be using it for? What's your main application for this microphone going to be? And also, how is your environment? How does your recording environment sound? If you happen to live in a relatively noisy environment, or you have a lot of ambient noises, maybe your neighbor mows his lawn, 4 times a week, or you live near the airport and you've got lots of air traffic, you live near a busy street corner and you've got lots of street traffic or foot traffic, or next to a park and there's kids playing and swings squeaking and things like that. Maybe you have pets or kids or that tend to make noise in the home. No microphone is really going to be able to block those out, but a dynamic microphone, since when you use a dynamic microphone, since they are less sensitive, you tend to have to be much closer to them as you sing into them or play an instrument into them. That means that the relative sound of your voice, very close, compared to the distant sounds, that it just makes your voice much louder than the ambient sounds going on around you. So it might actually be a good idea to use a dynamic microphone in a situation like that. If you have a nice, quiet environment to record in, you don't have much ambient noise to deal with, then a condenser microphone is probably going to be your best bet because it can capture that amount of detail. But if you have a noisy environment, that condenser microphone they're so immensely sensitive, they are going to hear everything and it's going to drive you nuts. You can try to use things like noise gates and get handy and try to build a sound booth or vocal booth or soundproofing things, and we'll get into soundproofing and acoustic treatment later. But really, a less sensitive microphone closer to your sound source might be a good way to at least mitigate some ambient noise, some annoying noise. Okay, so one other consideration when you're picking out a microphone, and you'll see this on the description and in the specifications, is what's called the polar pattern. The polar pattern is essentially a 3-dimensional representation around the microphone of where it is most sensitive to picking up sound and where it is least sensitive picking up sound. I would say the most common polar pattern is called a cardioid pattern, and if I could get my camera to focus, I would put this up close, but it's not going to do any good. But for instance, on the Shure SM57, there's a little emblem, and it looks like kind of a rounded off upside down heart. And that symbol is the symbol for a cardioid polar pattern. That means that the microphone is much more sensitive to sound that is happening in front of it, and it's very insensitive to sound that's coming from behind it. And there's also a sensitivity to sounds coming from the side of the microphone. But it's going to be most sensitive on the front of the microphone. You can use that to your advantage. Let's say you're doing game commentary and you're playing a game and talking. A cardioid pickup pattern can come in handy because you can point the rear of the mic at what they call the null. You can point that towards your unwanted sound source and point the front of the microphone towards your wanted sound source, which would be your voice. And that will help lessen the amount of the clickety-clackety keyboard that you're picking up compared to how much of your voice you're picking up. So you can use that to your advantage. Another polar pattern that's common is the figure 8 polar pattern. So for instance, I'll get out the old LDC here. So, and this is what's known as a side address mic. You sing into the side of it and not the end of it. That would be an end address mic. So on this one, this has what's known as a selectable polar pattern or variable polar pattern. So on this microphone's power supply, you can click through the several different options for polar patterns. So not only can you do cardioid, which means it's going to be very sensitive to sound happening to the front of the mic and very insensitive to sound happening on the rear of the mic, but you can also do a figure 8 pattern, which means that it is going to be very sensitive on the front of the mic and also very sensitive on the back of the mic, and very insensitive to things to the sides of the mic. And there's also the omnidirectional pattern, which means it's going to be pretty much equally sensitive all the way around the microphone. Anytime the cardioid pattern in a small room in a home studio is probably going to be preferable, just because it's going to lessen the amount of reflected sound around the room that's going to be picked up by the microphone. It's not going to omit it by any means, but it'll be much less than any polar pattern that involves the rear of the microphone picking up something. So what that means to you is that if you sing into a cardioid polar pattern microphone, it's primarily just picking up the direct sound from your mouth straight into the capsule. Sound bounces all around a room, and so some of that reflected sound is still going to enter the front of the microphone, but at least it's not really entering the rear of the microphone, and that's helpful in a small room, in a home studio. In the figure 8 and the omni patterns where it is receiving from the rear as well, then it's receiving very little direct sound from your voice or your instrument, your sound source, and it's receiving a pretty significant amount of reflected sound from the room, which is going to make it sound much more roomy. If you're in a great sounding room, hey, that can be a great thing, but most of us are in bedrooms and garages and basements, and they're pretty crappy sounding rooms, and you really want to minimize the amount of that you end up with in your recording. Okay, so we talked about a few different types of microphones. We talked about some polar patterns. Let's talk about some accessories that you're going to need with your microphone. First things first, you're going to need a microphone stand. You really don't want to hold... Oh, speaking of ambient noise, there's my dog. You get him, Freddy. One moment. Okay, they're done. Okay, the first thing you're really going to need, and it's pretty obvious, is you're going to need a microphone stand. These microphones are sensitive, and you're really not going to want to hold them in your hand while you try to sing, and you really can't hold them in your hand while you're playing an instrument. So, because they'll pick up handling noise as you adjust your grip or move around with it. They'll pick that up, and that will come through in your recordings, and you really don't want that. So, get a stand. Almost every microphone that you buy is going to come with some way to attach the microphone to the stand. So for instance, like the this is an aftermarket one, but so for instance, the SM81 comes with, just a basic little clip, screws right onto the top of the microphone stand. Most of them are specially shaped and sized to hold the particular microphone that they came with. So it's not really a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. That can be a kind of a pain, because every time you get a mic, if you want to put a different mic on your stand, that means you probably also have to put a different clip on the stand, and that can be a little time-consuming sometimes. For large diaphragm condensers, and you've probably seen these, pictures of these in studios, and so this is called a shock mount, and this mounts in the same fashion, mounts onto your mic stand. And the mic fits into it as so. and is secured in there. This particular one has thumb screws that I hate because they're a pain to tighten and loosen. But the microphone is then suspended by these elastic bands, and that tends to help lessen or dampen any vibrations, low frequency vibrations that the microphone is going to pick up transmitted through the microphone stand. A lot of times it's not going to make a huge difference, but let's say you live on the second story of a building and you have central heat and air, and when the blower turns on, it kind of emits a little bit of low frequency rumble through the floor. Well, that'll be transmitted through the microphone stand and picked up by a really sensitive microphone. So a shock mount is a good way to help mitigate that. Actually, another good way to help mitigate something like that particular occurrence is a lot of microphones will have a couple of switches on them. And usually they're not accompanied by helpful words or anything. They're just little diagrams that may not be immediately obvious as to what they are. Again, I wish that my camera would cooperate with focusing. I'd show a close-up here, but there is one switch on this mic that controls what's called the low cut filter or a high pass filter. They're synonymous. They mean the same thing. When you engage it, it will filter out usually at 80 hertz and below. Now, there's not much useful information in the human voice or like an acoustic instrument as low as 80 hertz. But things like that central heating and air kind of rumble, that low, it can filter that kind of stuff out. Depending on what kind of floor you have, if you're moving around a little bit and that low frequency footfall noise, it can be filtered out with that. So you can use a shock mount in combination with a low cut filter, a high pass filter built into the microphone to really help mitigate some of those problems. Another feature on a lot of microphones is what's called a pad. So this particular one has a 10 decibel pad. So that means if you put this on a sound source and the sound source is so loud that even if you turn your preamp volume all the way down, you turn it down in your DAW software and it's still too loud, or it's distorting or clipping, you can engage the 10, in this one it's a 10 decibel pad, which will make it less sensitive. So it'll be able to withstand another 10 decibels before overloading. That can be handy if you're miking a really loud sound source. Some brass instruments are loud, or guitar amps and guitar cabinets, things like that. Okay, so you got your mic stand. You got your clip or shock mount to mount the mic stand, mount the mic to the mic stand. One thing you're going to need if you're going to sing into a microphone is one of these guys. This is called a pop filter or a pop screen. It is a very fine mesh that is stretched around a rigid hoop of some sort. This particular one is from Shure. There are all sorts of brands at all sorts of price points. This is kind of a middle of the road one. I think it works great. One feature that I really like is that it has a gooseneck, and that makes it really easy to position and get it where you want it between your face, between your mouth and the microphone. The reason why these are important is that certain consonant sounds that you make, like B's and P's, and depending on how you pronounce your G's and J's and things like that, it makes just a little puff of air. These very sensitive microphones are extremely sensitive to things like puffs of air, and they will make those P's and B's sound disproportionately loud in your recording. And so how you mitigate that is you put this between your mouth and the microphone, and it helps to dissipate those little puffs of air without really affecting the sound of your voice. You can make these yourselves. I've seen people do it with ladies' hosiery or pantyhose stretched across a crochet hoop, and if you can find a way to make a mounting device for that, then hey, that'll work just as well. It'll be uglier than sin, but it'll get the job done. Might be a fun do-it-yourself project. Okay, one other thing that you're definitely going to need for your microphone is a cable. Now, almost all of these microphones that I've shown you here all attach, all connect with this. Let's see, and again, it's not going to really focus, but you can probably at least see that it has these little 3 pins where the cable connects into. That connection is called an XLR. If you're using an audio interface, and I really hope you are using an audio interface, it is almost certainly going to have an XLR connection on it as well. So you just need, when you go to the store or shop online, you need a balanced XLR cable, and it'll be female on one end, male on the other end, and that'll be the connectivity. My personal deal with cables is I don't really buy into the super high dollar, super premium kind of cable. The Canare and Monster and Mogami cables, there's nothing wrong with it at all. If you have the money and that's what you want, certainly. I mean, it's a great cable. There's nothing wrong with it. In a home studio environment where your cables aren't going to really receive that much abuse, especially for a person like me, I tend to just plug things in and just leave them plugged in all the time. So I don't do a whole lot of plugging and unplugging. Really, just your average cable like Hosa or something is going to do a great job. It's going to be more than adequate for your needs in a home studio. About the only thing that's really going to matter is you don't want really crappy cable, because that will make a negative impact. For an XLR cable, you want balanced cable, and XLR is by nature balanced, so I think you would have to actually work to find an XLR cable that is not balanced. And you're going to want relatively high quality connectors on it, which most even average cable, they're using connectors like Nutric and Switchcraft, and those are great. So shop around a little bit. I wouldn't go spending $50, $60, $70 on a XLR cable to plug your microphone in. I think there are plenty of options from places like Monoprice and even like all the music gear websites in your local shop. They're all going to have just piles and piles of XLR cables. I would suggest, as far as length, I would say get it a little longer than you think. I always make that mistake of buying a cable that is pretty much the exact length that I need. 6 feet sounds like plenty. It was like, well, if I only want to be 6 feet away, yeah, sure, that works. But that didn't really take into account that it's got to plug in at waist level and go to the floor and over to your mic stand and back up to head level to plug into your microphone. So buy it a little longer than you think you need. Maybe, honestly, I'm not sure that I would buy one shorter than 20 feet. XLR cable and balance cable in general is really good about, you can have pretty long runs of it, and it's not really going to pick up much interference, or really any interference. If you think about it, a cable is just a long strand of copper. That makes a really good antenna. But between the shielding around the cable and the mechanism that makes it a balanced cable, they're very good at rejecting noise. Okay, well, let me think here. We've got our stand, we've got our attachment, we've got our microphone, we got our pop filter and a cable to plug it in with. Hopefully you've got a little bit of helpful information about making a decision of what type of microphone you're going to want for your first microphone. I hope this has been of some help. If you have any further questions or comments, suggestions, or anything, leave them in the comments below, and I'll reply to them. And good luck. I hope you find what you're looking for. Thanks for hanging with me. See you next time, guys.